please, now and turn to the book of 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 5. We are coming to the conclusion of our series, our doctrinal study on biblical parenting. We began this study early in the year and have been working our way through this each week, trying to encourage our families and even those that do not have families on what it means to raise the next generation in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And so we come to our final principle of biblical parenting. There were 7 of them, or there are 7 of them. The first one we began with was to lay a solid foundation. Foundation is so crucial in raising a family. What is that family built upon? The second principle was to maintain consistent communication. Again, communication is critical if a family is going to thrive. It is essential for a husband and wife. It is also essential for parents and their children. The third principle was to cultivate godly character. As the parents understand what God's objectives are and what His intentions and His desires are, to take those and convey them adequately to the children, remembering, first of all, that we must be willing to model that character ourselves. If we do not model that character, then we should not anticipate that our children are going to model it as well, but to cultivate godly character. The fourth principle of biblical parenting was to administer loving discipline. We cannot raise children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord without loving discipline. That is a part of biblical parenting. And we went through what it means to administer loving discipline. The fifth principle was to promote a spiritual atmosphere. Promote a spiritual atmosphere. That goes to the very nuts and bolts of what it is like in the home. What are the hobbies, the habits, the practices, the things that we introduce into the home? Are we promoting a spiritual atmosphere? If we introduce worldliness, carnality, base humor, if we introduce these things into the home, then we should not be surprised if our home does not reflect the glory of God. And then last Sunday we looked at regulating carnal appetites. Regulating carnal appetites. And we took a moment to explain what the carnal appetites really are, what we're talking about with carnal appetites. And by carnal, we're simply meaning our fleshly appetites, not necessarily sinful ones. I know in the Scriptures, many times the Bible equates carnality with sinfulness, and in that use of the term, yes, that is true. But we all have carnal appetites, things that we look for, that we really need in some cases. You know, we talked about just the basics of food. We talked about enjoyment of relationships and so forth. We have these things, but being able to regulate them so that they enhance the spirit, because the most important feature or the most important component of any human being is the spirit, the inside, what is on the inside. And that is where the emphasis needs to be in the home, to regulate those carnal appetites. This morning, I'd like to bring the final principle and the notes that you have there. Number 7 is to remain constantly. Okay, they were out there on the table. Okay, if you could go ahead and grab those, I'd appreciate that. I thought that they were being passed out, so I think they have them. Oh, the table had those. I guess folks didn't grab them. Okay, thank you. I appreciate. Oh, here they come. Here they come, Dad. Here they come, Dad. Here they come. Yep. Thank you. I appreciate that. No, not a problem at all. We appreciate you putting those together for us. Make sure everybody has one of those. Apologize for that, but get those taken care of real quickly. But number 7, remain constantly vigilant. Constantly vigilant. In 1 Peter chapter 5 and in verse 8, Peter warns, he says, be sober, be vigilant. Why? Because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Several observations just in this particular passage. First of all, we recognize that Satan is our adversary. There's nothing about the Christian experience that pleases the devil. There's nothing that we can do that pleases God that also pleases the devil. He is in opposition to every element, every facet, every single ingredient of Christianity that God has intended for us. That is repulsive to the devil. He is an adversary, he is an enemy, he is an opponent, he is an obstruction. That is what the devil is. And Peter makes it very clear that he is not someone that you can sign a treaty with, not someone that you can compromise with, not someone that will understand. No, he is always going to push and push and push to introduce everything that is vile, everything that is fraudulent, everything that is decadent into the home and into our children. There are no limits to what Satan will try to bring into the life of an individual. We've asked this question before. Is there a level too low for Satan to stoop to? There is no level too low. And we see it in our world's cultures today. Things that we thought we would never see as a norm are becoming more and more prevalent. You cannot go into public places anymore without seeing certain things that we would think to ourselves, why? Why? But that's because Satan never lets up. He pushes and he pushes. And the reason why he pushes, at least in part, is because man represents the highest of God's creation. He was created in God's image. And the devil loathes the image of God. He wants to erase it, efface it, and make it into his own corrupted image. And so he will do everything he can to poison the cultures of this world and draw them further away from truth. And so Peter says the devil is our adversary. But he also points out in this verse that he is not stagnant. He is not stationary. He is constantly on the move, constantly looking for opportunities. Now, he himself is not omniscient. He is not omnipresent. He is not omnipotent. But he has his minions, whether they be spiritual, such as demons, devils, or even his human instruments that have allowed themselves to become a repository for evil. They are everywhere, and they're doing his bidding, seeking to draw the souls of men away from God. And that's exactly what he says. He seeketh whom he may devour. He is actively pursuing souls. He doesn't take a vacation. He doesn't take a sabbatical. He doesn't let up. And sometimes we think to ourselves, how did we get to where we are? Well, it has been fermenting and percolating for thousands of years. We saw at Babel Satan's first global attempt. God dispersed the people. But that doesn't mean Satan quit. He didn't run up the white flag and surrender. He simply went underground. And he's been working underground ever since in the governments and the cultures and the societies of mankind all over the globe. Yes, he is not sitting still. So the parent must be vigilant. In your notes, Christian parenting is a 24/7 proposition. It requires constant vigilance. Our adversary, the devil, never takes a vacation, never calls a truce, never takes a day off. Likewise, a parent's vigilance must never lapse. This vigilance must extend into areas that may seem benign and harmless. Satan is called a serpent. Of course, this goes back to the Garden of Eden. But he is referred to as a serpent. Now, a serpent is not a stalking predator. Now, the devil refers to him as a lion, so he is active. He is active. But the serpent is an ambush predator. They use camouflage and concealment, so then they can strike. You never see a python slithering through the grass trying to chase down a gazelle. Okay? It doesn't work that way. He hides in concealment and then strikes when his prey is within range. And that is what Satan does. He is an ambush predator. He looks for ways of taking what seems to be a very harmless thing. You have the deer coming to the water to take a drink. It's a nice, clean, still environment. Everything seems to be fine and beautiful, and it's drinking, and then strikes. And that's what Satan does. He strikes from ambush. And so there's some things that I think the parents need to be careful of. Little letter A in your notes, privacy. Privacy. There should never be any secrets between couples, and never any between children and their parents. This needs to be something that parents instill in their children early on. Let them know that we don't keep secrets in our home. Now, that doesn't mean that as adults, parents hold conversations between themselves. There's certain things that we simply do not share with our children. Many times it's age appropriate, but that's not a secret. Parents, make sure your children are not encouraged to keep secrets. Anyone who has a friend who says, let's not tell your parents, that is not a good friend. That's not a good friend. That is someone who is being used of the devil to cast a snare. As a child matures, a certain degree of privacy is natural and necessary. However, such privacy should be afforded as the need arises and not become an excuse for shutting out the rest of the family. As our children got older, we understood that, hey, they need a little bit of privacy. Can't just come barging into the room with my daughters there. Need to knock. But it was as the need afforded. For example, if they were changing, getting dressed, okay, we closed the door. But we wanted to be careful that they did not find their room as a refuge from the family. Shut the door. This is my space. That's not a healthy arrangement. Sometimes we would close the door, but we would leave it ajar. Leave it cracked. It wasn't fully closed. So that there was a sense of privacy, but at the same time it was not shutting the family out. Parents, listen very carefully. If you allow your children to shut themselves off from the rest of the family, you are producing an incubator for potential harmful things. That's an incubator for sinful habit patterns, because nobody is watching, nobody is paying attention, there's no accountability. It is not healthy as a policy to permit children to seclude themselves behind closed doors without any adult supervision. Leaving the door at least ajar so as to allow parents to remain in visual contact with their children is prudent. Every parent should know exactly what their children have stored in their room and what activities they are engaged in. It is their privilege, their right, and their duty. As a parent, I have a privilege to know what my children are doing, what they have. It is my right. I have afforded them this space to live, and it is my duty to know what's going on. That's not called spying. That's called accountability. It's recognizing that you're in this home. This home has been dedicated to the Lord Jesus Christ. I must be a quality control agent to make sure that nothing comes in that is harmful to my family. That is the role of the parent, to be careful of the concept of privacy. Yes, in our home, there was a privacy afforded. From time to time, it was unavoidable. It was only natural. It was necessary. But our children always knew that we could come in and see what they had in their room at any time we chose. And we wanted to make sure that the books they brought home, the music they were listening to, the things they had on their computer, if they had one. Of course, our children did not get computers till they needed them for college. What they had on their phones, which they also did not get till they were needed for work. We were able to see. What do you got? Sometimes kids set passwords for their laptops, for their tablets, for their phones. Parents, you need to know what those passwords are. That's not something you keep. You say, what's mine? But you're under my authority, and I'm responsible for you. What's your password? I'm sorry, that's my position. That's what I think is healthy. Because if, like I said, if we don't inspect it, then we shouldn't expect it. Don't expect it. Because sin will find its way in. Satan is an ambush predator. Sad, one of the most tragic things is for parents to say, I never knew. I never knew they were doing that. I never knew they were listening to that. I never knew they were going there. I never knew they had this person as a friend, that they were messaging back and forth. I never knew that they were reading that book. Everything rises and falls on leadership. We hold those that lead us accountable. What do you mean you didn't know? It's your job to know, right? Well, that's the same way with parents. Parents as well. Small b, peer pressure. Peer pressure. As has already been addressed, excuse me, parents should monitor the friends their children have, making no assumptions. Making no assumptions. It takes only one exposure to something evil to harm a child physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And that harm may be permanent. Knowing where their children are and with whom and for how long are part and parcel to effective parenting. Parties and sleepovers are prime arenas for potential hazards. The wise parent will exercise extreme caution, even if it means their child must miss out on fun with their peers. Better to have a disappointed child than a defiled one. To me, that is so important. I would rather my child be disappointed, even angry with me, than have my child exposed to something that I cannot take back. Can't reverse course. They saw it, they were exposed to it, they're involved in it, and I can't erase that. Can't change it. Whenever our children were invited to a party, and again, there's no assumptions here. Largely their parties were Christian families, but we made no assumptions. Oh, they're a Christian family. They go to the same school and everything, So? Doesn't mean their standards are our standards. Doesn't mean that they are effectively parenting. I may not know, but I'm not going to assume that they are. So oftentimes I would have conversations over the phone with the parents. So what's going to be going on? Oh, we're going to watch some movies. Well, what movies are you going to watch? I want to know. And there have been times saying, well, I appreciate that. Our kid can come over for, give some gifts and cake and so forth, but we'll have to bring her home before you have your movie time. We're not going to watch that. My wife and I were very careful to screen everything before we ever showed it to our children, because we were the first line of defense. We were the battlement around the roof. We didn't want them being exposed to something that we would have to try and explain later or deal with later. And so peer pressure can be a place that, as parents, we have to be careful. Who are our friends? Who are our children's friends? Don't assume anything. Don't assume. It takes work. It means sometimes being unpopular. I've had people, young people, tell me that they were upset with me for my stand on certain things because it deflated their desire to do something. They wanted to do that, but because pastor said it probably wasn't a good idea, oh man, killjoy, But I would rather them be upset with me than to know that I had facilitated in any way that child's descent into something that would harm them. So being a parent is sometimes an unpopular role, but it is essential that we remain vigilant. C, music. One of the most insidious areas where Satan has captured the hearts and minds of young people is in the area of music. As has already been observed, Christ-honoring music can enhance the spiritual atmosphere in the home. What children listen to when away from home, or what is listened to via earbuds or headphones in the home, should also be an area of concern for Christian parents, however. So being able to say there's certain things, if your friend gives them a music CD and we look at it and we say, no, this is not the kind of music we want in the home. Thank you, but no thank you. I'm not going to play this in the home. I'm not going to have this in your room. Again, we're trying to be quality control agents, and sometimes the children may not understand the nature of that quality. But as the mature adult, we have to make that decision. Every one of us understands that. When you go to work, depending on what kind of job you do have certain quality expectations. Your supervisor comes in and say, hey, let's redo that. We don't say, oh, fine, I'm going to have freedom. Yeah, it's a free country. No, these are rules, and this is the policy, and this is what we're going to do. It's the way it's supposed to be. And we all know what it's like to go in a place that doesn't have quality control. Have you been into a supermarket where there is no quality control? Where nobody really is keeping up on the product, keeping things clean, organized, labeled properly. And then you go someplace where everything is very orderly and neat. Well, we know the difference. We know the difference. Well, that's the way it needs to be in the home as well, where we are the bulwark against that which... And again, these standards are going to vary from home to home. I can't tell you this is what you should do in every situation, but it's something that a parent should take very seriously and take before the Lord. And then they lay that for their family. Their families that our children grew up with, that we differed on certain things. We understood that. We did not try to impose ours upon them, but we would not also allow them to impose theirs on ours. Small d. Television and movies, and I will throw in another one here, computer games. Computer games. What children see is just as important as what they hear. Parents should screen every program or movie before allowing their child to watch it. We all know that Hollywood is in the business of raising godly children. But sometimes they need our help, right? No, Hollywood is not in the business of raising godly children. They're in the business of doing the exact opposite. They're actively engaged in trying to corrupt children. Remember, what passes through a child's eye, their eye gate can never be erased. Once you see it, you saw it. One of the things that, and it's true for hearing. Now, hearing, we can begin to forget, and time sometimes can make our memory of certain things diminish. Sometimes you watch, say, a movie where there is a court case and the judge says the jury will strike that, you will not consider that. Well, they just heard it. So like, how do you completely erase that from your mind? Well, same way with, once that child has seen that on the screen, once they've played that game, how do you erase that? It's there. And Satan can use that image to direct their thoughts in a direction that will ultimately set the table for further problems. That's why we didn't want our children surfing the web. Because we didn't want, how they have those little ads on the sidebars? We didn't want them bumping into some of those things and seeing some of those things that might get them thinking in a direction we didn't want them thinking. Now, I think there are certain controls and things, parental controls, that can help. I think it's very wise to implement those. But television, movies, video games, all of these need to be regulated and vigilantly monitored. Small e, online access. I kind of already touched on that. The source of much evil is found on the internet. The wise parent will be extremely careful when it comes to exposing their children to its influence. A child should never be allowed to access the internet unsupervised. Internet filters can be helpful, but should never be viewed as a fail-safe measure. An unsupervised child with a cell phone, tablet, or laptop is a recipe for disaster. We have a culture of corruption that feeds on the naivete of parents and on the innocency, supposedly, of children. Draws them in, corrupts their mind, gets them thinking in paths and in directions that they should not. So as a parent, my responsibility is to be very careful. What am I allowing my children to see on the internet, to look for? Very careful. You can find anything you want on the internet. And then small f, personal safety. Personal safety. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 4, Solomon writes, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, and if one prevail against him, 2 shall withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Young people, particularly young ladies, should not venture out alone after dark. Even during daylight hours, the safety of numbers can be helpful. Not only does it provide mutual support in the event of trouble, but it can also act as a deterrent to foolish behavior, provided, of course, they're in wise and trusted company. Having a gaggle of teenagers on their own is not necessarily a recipe for good things. But having a responsible young person, someone you know by experience and habit has made right choices, good. To direct them where they need to go, to do the right thing, Be very careful. Sometimes Sharon and I will be driving down the road and we'll see a little kid on a bike just all by themselves. Think, what is that parent thinking? That is a future candidate for a milk carton. Or future candidate for somebody who is going to get themselves in a lot of trouble someday. And so their safety is of paramount importance. Parents should remain proactive in caring for the personal safety of their children. Never assume everything will be all right. Remember the wisdom of taking precautions and preemptive action. In the book of Proverbs 22, verse 3, "The wise man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself." He anticipates this could be a problem. I'm going to avoid it. I'm not going to continue on merrily assuming, oh, it'll be okay. I wonder how many people have lost their lives or have injured themselves by saying, oh, it'll be okay. I know I have. Yeah. We all know what it's about. Let's not assume anything, especially when it comes to the life and well-being of our children. It's our responsibility. I'd like to close with this, the promise of biblical parenting. In Proverbs 22, verse 6, the Bible says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." This glorious promise should remain as a constant incentive for every Christian parent. If these biblical principles are applied deliberately and consistently, every parent can rest in the assurance that their child will remain on a course of godliness and fruitfulness for the Lord. To train up is an archery term and carries the notion of aiming an arrow. That's literally what it's talking about. You train up, you aim that bow, you aim that arrow, and you let it fly. So as we train our children, we are aiming them in the direction that they should go so that they fly straight and true. That is precisely what parents are endeavoring to do with their children. And that last statement there, aim them in the direction they should go so that when they are released, they will fly straight and true for God. Aim them in the direction they should go so that when they are released, they will fly straight and true for God. That's precisely what we as parents are endeavoring to do. Yes, Walt. Mm-hmm. This is being exposed. Yeah. You know, we actually probably could add several things to this, and certainly their education is one of them. We did touch on education a little bit in one of the earlier principles, but you're right, their exposure to the environment, the public school environment, if that's where they're attending school, is going to be a hazard that as parents need to be aware of. it. Let's close in a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we pray that you'd bless as we continue to worship you in spirit and in truth today.